Count of five, four, three, two, one. Hello and welcome to productlessons.com, a YouTube channel where we talk to product leaders from all over the world and learn from them how they build and manage world class software products. Before we begin, you may subscribe to the channel to be notified for further future episodes. And I can assure you that there is an exciting lineup of product leaders in the coming days. And if you want audio only format for consumption, you can also use SoundCloud. The link is in the description below. So with that, let me talk about the guest today and why I'm so thrilled to have him. Our guest today is Bala Subramaniam, a seasoned data-driven product business and technology leader whose last gig was at the head of product fulfillment at Instacart, and he has held several leadership roles in the past as well in reputed companies like LinkedIn, Microsoft, Adara, etc. So with that, let's welcome Bala. Hello, Bala. Welcome to productlessons.com. How are you doing today?
Hey Ravi, thanks for having me. Very excited to share lessons and notes with you and your speakers. And hope everybody is having a great Friday with all the crazy things that are happening in the world right now. Nothing more important than having a good weekend.
I know, and so I'm also looking forward to the conversation, especially looking at your vast experience. I was excitedly jotting down questions on what I should be asking. I had my own motives also to talk to you because I wanted to understand about product operations and stuff like that. So let's before we jump into the meatier things, I'm very curious to know how has your career trajectory shaped over the years? How did you begin your product journey? Maybe that will be a good place to start our conversation.
Absolutely. Happy to give you a timeline journey. And whenever I say timeline, it makes me feel older than I actually am, but I'll do it one more time. Quick summary. I started out my career as an engineer, graduated out of computer science back in India. And then my first job was writing server-side code for Microsoft server products. So I was there for a couple of years. And then thankfully, I had an opportunity to come and work for the search engine with Microsoft, the Bing.com. And there, that was my first stint at working on products that has a much more deeper integration with like learning products, machine learning, AI. And I learned everything on the job. So I think that was one of the fantastic experiences where not only understanding the technical side of it, but seeing how data products can shape the consumer experiences was such a pivotal part of my learning. And along the way, I think one interesting thing happened, which is I was part of a few teams where we did not have dedicated product managers on the team, like for some reason, and it allowed me to scale not only as an engineering manager, because product manager was our counterpart, and we didn't have one of those folks, but it allowed me to kind of step into the product role accidentally. So that was one of the reasons where I first even got exposed to a role called like product manager. And then in that role, again, I was amazed at the intersection of my goals rather with the needs of the role. So one of the things that I'm always excited by is the outcomes of a project or a product or a feature, and less about like the output of like how we are doing it. And the distinction is very important. Outcomes are always driven by business needs and consumer needs, whereas output can be an output of any job. If you're writing code, if you're trying to kind of create a feature, there is a positive outcome if you've done something out of it, but not always outcomes, not always outputs leads to great outcomes. So that was one of the things where I accidentally discovered and felt like, hey, this is the role that I wanted to do, hopefully for the rest of my career, and made a formal switch in Microsoft. And from there, the journey into product management and product leadership started. Again, LinkedIn was also a great experience where, because that was my first stint at working for a Silicon Valley company with like formal product management, engineering, design, data science. So I learned a lot about like developing products at scale. How do you work and influence stakeholders? Like, how do you kind of think about design? How do you think about data? both in the perspective of like doing experimentation, also in the perspective of like how do you bring data into the products. So it was such a nice pit stop for me to kind of learn the art and science. But I would say the bigger culmination of all these things was when I was very fortunate enough to join Instacart in its early days, where back in 2005, I think I was probably the fourth or fifth product manager on the team, and I was very fortunate to have led the team that was responsible for fulfillment. I'm happy to go into fulfillment sometime later, and that's where I think all of these learnings and skills and competencies came together, because it was an opportunity for me to put all those learnings into practice.
Excellent. And that's what would be the meatier stuff. You led product management and product operations for fulfillment, right? Maybe we can begin by understanding what fulfillment means, and then we would jump into product operations, maybe.
Sure. So just to clarify what any operations company mean by fulfillment is, if you look at like Uber or Instacart, Postmates, DoorDash, any of the companies where there is a consumer part of the product that faces the consumers. For example, in Instacart, Instacart.com and Instacart app is the place where consumer go spend their time and create a grocery cart and then place an order. So we can call that like the e-commerce side of the business. The important piece of Instacart is basically a service, which is the moment you place an order on Instacart.com, the magic behind the scenes actually kicks off, which is how do you kind of think about servicing that customer and servicing that order. And this is the same with companies like Amazon or DoorDash or anything, where the consumer actually interacts with the e-commerce side of the business, but the moment their interaction or transaction is done, it is taken over by what I call the fulfillment. The goal of that is to make sure that you fulfill the customer needs with all the items in the cart. In the case of Instacart, all the produce items, all the items that are part of your dinner or like the weekend order, and then make sure that those items reach the customer doorsteps. In the case of delivery, or in the case of pickup, you allow the customer to pick it up from a place. So that life cycle is what we used to call within Instacart product team as fulfillment.
Got it. So it's mostly relevant in when you're delivering a service, so to say, end-to-end service and a life cycle to that.
Yep. I would say to even generalize it, it's more around whenever a product that you have to the customers has, let's say, some sort of like a physical element to it, whether you are bringing a package in case of Amazon, you're bringing food in case of DoorDash, you're bringing grocery in case of, let's say, Instacart or Postmates, there is always a physical back-end element of the work, very heavy weighted on operations. That's what usually it's called like fulfilling your customer demand. That's why the term fulfillment actually came.
Got it. So my interest was understanding the product operations side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Especially product operations has been a new player in the block, right? At least in the last year or so, we have been hearing about operations. I mean, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe we were not talking about product operations. So I would like to understand from you what is product operations and why is it needed?
Great question. I think this is one of the terms I would say it's still being coined or being termed. So I'll give my perspective, and would love for like the listeners to do their own research on this budding topic. I would say just like how product management was a little bit like newer and budding like 10 years back, similar to that, operations is probably in the timeline today. So I think the best way to explain this is like starting with what is the role of a product manager. At the end of the day, product managers are responsible for like solving business problems and consumer problems. You always start with the business and the consumer problem, and you work backwards from that need and trying to create a product or a feature or a solution or a service to make that happen. So in this journey, let's say you look at the typical product management playbook for a consumer PM. It involves a lot of user research, understanding the consumer. It involves a lot of working with design and UX teams. It involves a lot of understanding from the customer success teams and reading the tickets and things like that. So those kind of playbooks actually exist thanks to companies like, let's say, Facebook or Google or Twitter. These are the companies that have actually mastered this playbook over the last few decades. But if you look at the kind of marketplace companies and operational companies that are evolving as we speak, whether it is the Ubers of the world, Instacart, Postmates, DoorDash, there is a significant part of product management that involves what I call the operational side of the things. For example, in my case, it was around like how do you build a product ecosystem? How do you build the product organization that is responsible for delivering amazing experiences to the customers as part of delivering groceries? And also, how do you make sure that the key metrics like profitability, efficiency, quality of service are high? So even though there is an intersection between the classic product management and what I call like the operational product management, there are some elements of operational product management that needs a newer set of pages in the playbook of product. And I think this is what I meant by it's evolving. Like there is no formal understanding of this yet, but the role of product operations manager came from the fact that there are certain set of things that the team or the PM needs that can be helped by someone who's much more closer to the field, who's much more closer to the actual operations team or the associates who are working in the field or the customer success team who are sitting in multiple areas. And the culmination of all these tasks eventually became a product operations manager. Let me give you one example.
Right.
So, for example, in the case of Instacart, Instacart is close to like multiple thousands of stores deliver from Instacart delivers from multiple thousands of stores, and multiple hundreds of retailers are part of it across the North American. And similarly for Uber, like Uber is arguably there in every zip code in North America. So there is, by nature of the vastness of this product ecosystem, there is a little bit of inconsistency. Probably there is suburban markets are different from urban markets. New York is probably different from, let's say, Florida in some of the cases, because the nature of the product, which are operations driven, needs a little bit of tweaking for like every different market. So product operations manager can step in and help a PM saying that, hey, here are the different set of needs. And that person, he or she, can become the first line of defense of understanding the requirements, understanding what is working somewhere, and also the flavor of the products. I think this is where it becomes very interesting. For example, when you're looking at a consumer product or a mobile app, you have all the tool sets available for a technology team, product or engineering, to launch experiments like at a click of a button, right? You have tools like Optimizely. You have, in the case of like bigger companies, they have homegrown tools to say, hey, this is the A/B testing flavor that I want to try there. This is the treatment that I want to try in this for this set of customers. But in an operational product, it's actually harder to do that without understanding what's happening on the ground. So those are all set of things that I would say came together in a role called product operations, where they became the lieutenants of product managers in companies like Uber, DoorDash, and Instacart, and Lyft, and so on and so forth. So that's how it's actually that's how it started. The role started. I also think there is a inherent advantage of this role, which I did not anticipate when we had what we used to call like fulfillment operations at Instacart, where those folks who were part of the team became subject matter experts, and they played such a pivotal role in making the fulfillment product better. And in fact, a side benefit of this is we kind of use that as like an academy for like budding product managers, because you kind of understand the domain much better by being closer to the field. You understand all the problems because you're talking to the customers, you're talking to the associates who are doing the deliveries and things like that. So an added advantage for a company that is heavily relying on operational product management is to start this as like an academy for like product managers, and some of them can graduate to become even product managers later. But it's such a pivotal role to increase the productivity of what I call product management, especially in an operational role.
Got it. So you mentioned about adding new pages to the product management playbook. So the eventual goal of product operations would be to make the processes more efficient, isn't it? The operational process more efficient. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of the playbook. But I would say successful POMs or product operations managers have also come up with features to kind of make the product better. So it's not just making the team efficient. I think that is like I would say that's table stakes, because that's the whole purpose of the role, bringing efficiency to the product management. But an added advantage should be to allow them to maybe like take one or two features and get a flavor of how to kind of shape those features as well.
Uh, got it. So that is it also fair to say then pure play software, which is not into operations or fulfillment, they need not have a product operations set, isn't it?
I've not seen much, but sometimes what I hear from my product leader friends at other companies, maybe like enterprise tech and things like that, product marketing managers kind of play that role. They kind of go out and get an understanding of the market, work more with sales and things like that. It's just that the PMM has become the POM of the operations people. I think that's probably a good comparison.
Got it. So maybe you could go a little deeper on how you set it up at Instacart.
So at Instacart, it was less around. It wasn't coined POM per se, but rather like we had what we call like a central operations team, which was responsible for being like the first line of defense for every product that we put out from fulfillment. And the role of the team was again to be the two-way gate for both helping with making the products better and also like trying to kind of fill that last 1% 2% where the products were falling short. I'll give you one example, right? So let's say companies like Instacart and DoorDash does like millions of transactions per day. By the nature of this operational products, not everything will be completely automatable. Like for example, out of let's say 1 million orders, maybe 99.99% is automated, meaning there is no intervention in how an order comes to Instacart, how a shopper is actually assigned a particular order, how that shopper goes to the store. There is a seamless flow of all these actions or workflows that make magical experience happen. But still, there is this 0.01% of the orders, which is still like 0.01% of million is probably like thousand. Is it thousand? Yeah, there's thousand orders where something needs to kind of help in making that order. Thousand orders is still a lot, right? So you need some tools to make things happen. Maybe a driver did not show up, or maybe the bags got dropped, maybe they had a flat tire. There are these all these edge cases that needs to be handled through tools and standard operating procedures, SOPs, that they call in the operations world. And that's how the team was set up. The team was set up to use the tools to intervene to create great product experiences for the customers first. And through the usage of those tools, they understand patterns. And this is where my previous point on successful product operations managers are smart enough in understanding those patterns and come back to the team and work with, hey, out of these thousand orders, I think we could have actually automated maybe 800 of them if we understood this particular assumption really well, if we understood this particular workflow well. And that's how we got better and better over time, because it was not zero point 0.01 like many years back. Like it would have been like 10% or 15%. And through working with the fulfillment operations, we got to kind of understand the nuances of all these cases, and we kind of chipped off each of these cases.
Got it. So what would be some familiar KPIs when you are improving your operations? So is it like fulfillment time? Are there so I'm sure there are gates, okay, because with if it is a delivery product, then okay, when one product passes hands from one place to the other, so lead times and stuff like that, are there what are the kind of KPIs usually for operations?
I think in general, again, not specific to Instacart, general operational companies usually start with like 4 or 5 high-level metrics. I can maybe give a summary of it, and if there are any further questions, happy to go deep as well. I think at the highest level, you need to think about growth, which is like, do you have the right capacity for growth? Because by definition, all these companies are growing. There's more consumer demand, and whenever your service depends on somebody else fulfilling that service, you need to make sure that both the sides are growing. For example, a Facebook growth team need not think about what I call capacity. The only thing that they need to think about is probably compute capacity. Like if there are 100 million more users coming next year, do we have the right set of like compute and network and storage? So that's one side of capacity, but it's not a marketplace equilibrium. Whereas if you look at Uber, like they need to make sure that as the demand of the riders increase, the demand of the supply of the drivers also need to increase. So the most important thing that these operational companies need to think about is like, are they set up for growth? And that means having the capacity, having the right pipeline for supply and things like that. The second thing that of course is very crucial when it comes to operational services is quality of service, because ultimately you need to delight the customers and you need to work backwards from the consumer needs. So it's extremely important to think about quality of service, and it can boil down to something very specific. In the case of Uber, maybe it's like 5 stars for the rides. In the case of DoorDash, it could be like, hey, did we get all the items that the customer ordered and things like that. The third important thing that you need to think about in an operational context is ultimately the cost, because one of the things that very different with companies that are in the marketplace space or the operational space is there is a huge cost of fulfilling or completing that particular transaction. So if you're getting $1 in revenue, are you able to kind of complete that transaction with less than $1 in cost? Because if you're not able to do that, then your unit economics is actually not strong. So as you're growing, you're going to burn more money. So the most important thing in scaling businesses that are operationally intensive is ensuring that your unit economics is strong with cost being lower than the revenue. And I think that's what I would put it in the bucket of profitability and efficiency.
Got it. So would you, if there is an entrepreneur who wants to venture into two businesses and he has to pick one, you talked about unit economics, and the nature of such operational businesses is there is a lot of OPEX cost, isn't it? Which a pure play software does not have. And then you cannot, a pure play software is built once and sold many times, so it's the rewards are manifold. However, in operational businesses, when you scale, your costs are also scaling, isn't it?
Yep.
So how would you see this? Is this an attractive place to be, or maybe I'm just trying to ask you, since you are experienced in this field.
I think great question, right? I would first say it is a tough business. Like I think like but the way I would think about it is like the challenge is basically in solving consumer problems. Because ultimately, if you look at the companies like starting with Amazon, right? Like they are innovating like every day, and of course it's a tough business because there is a huge amount of operational cost in bringing up a fulfillment center and buying like 100 electric vans every month and things like that. But it is all in the spirit of solving the consumer problem, which is whatever you order should be in your doorstep within an hour. I think even though it's a challenging business, the fact that you are addressing such a vast variety of consumers makes it interesting enough for technologists, for product leaders to actually be part of it. Because when it works really big. Because like once you understand, like, again, this is nothing against like SaaS companies and enterprise, right? I'm a huge fan of enterprise tech. Of course the margins are much higher there, right? And you can take a look at all the recent IPOs that have happened, and it's a clear case of why enterprise tech is another attractive business. But when consumer businesses that involve these operational needs has a formula that works, after that it's all about growth. Because once you know that engine is working, you are trying to put like more oil into that engine and make it like give more throughput. So I would gladly do it again given a chance.
So optimization becomes the key, right? So how do you reduce wastage and make it efficient and scalable without adding a lot of costs? So that's where your energies would be spent, isn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely continuous optimization is a part of it, because you have to shave off like maybe 50 cents or dollar continuously to make the unit economics work. But you also need to take big bets, because the interesting thing is sometimes in the technical terms, I used to tell my team, let's not work to go always to the local maxima. That means that, let's say there are a set of constraints that you're operating with and you're continuously making some improvements. Maybe you're shaving off like 5 cents and 3 cents and 10 cents here and there, but in the larger picture you're kind of missing the opportunity and the resource on the roadmap to go and find the next big thing that can get you $1. So I think as product leaders, it is extremely important to always be aware, how do you balance these what I call metrics movers with strategic bets. Because if you're just focusing on strategic bets, then you don't have the license to resource it, because you have a company that is bleeding money. But at the same time, if you're just doing the metrics movers, then you're missing the bigger opportunity in play. So it's about balancing. Sometimes it's art, and of course there is a lot of science and data involved as well. But I think as product leaders, I would definitely advise everybody to constantly relook their roadmap to see what is the balance between metrics movers and strategic bets.
Metrics movers and strategic bets. I'm imagining when Uber started, instead of optimizing their operations, somebody would have, some product manager would have come up with an idea of also delivering food. So that's how Uber Eats may have originated. Is what I've never tracked the story and the origin story of Uber Eats, but maybe that would be a metrics mover for, as an example.
So I would say that's a little bit. I would put that in the strategic bucket. I'll explain to you why. So again, I don't know how the story evolved, right? But again, when I look back, the main thing that Uber optimizes for, or any company, any operational company, which are like two-sided optimizes for, is like how best you can use your supply side resources, because your demand is always there, right? You've spent the money, you've got that customer as part of customer acquisition, and you know your product is good. That's why they're coming back and helping. So let's say that you have cracked the product market fit on the consumer side.
Right.
Now the reality is, the demand side, once you have cracked, is not just the gameplay, right? Because if you remember, there was a time where people used to work for like Uber bonuses, and after the bonus is done, they leave. So that means that you've spent a lot of money in acquiring this driver, but after the initial spend, probably they are gone because the money is not good. So the most important thing to think about is how do you kind of create this equilibrium in which you are constantly reusing the supply side and creating more utilization out of it. So for example, my guess is sometime down the line they would have said like, hey, we have X number of drivers and they're only busy 20% of the time. So because we just have less demand, we have acquired all these users, what can we do? So that might have been an advent of, okay, we can actually create a new line of products. We already have X million customers, and of course food delivery is on the rise. I don't know, many other things is on the rise. So let's just use the same consumer base, because note that you have zero customer acquisition there, because you've already acquired the customer as part of your ride sharing business. Now, how can we reuse the consumer base? And what that does to the supply base, it just gives them more opportunity to make more money, which means that they will stick with the company longer. So this would be an example of a data-driven strategic bet, where when you're looking at the metrics, you're saying, aha, there are X number of drivers, but honestly, they are not busy even 50% of the time. How can we make them busy?
Excellent. Thank you. My next question would be moving to your success story. You developed a framework for supply side, which is for activation, engagement, and retention, and led the framework for marketplace equilibrium. Maybe could you explain what this framework is all about? And marketplace equilibrium is about achieving an equilibrium between demand and supply, right? Consumers and producers.
Yep, definitely. I think I'll try to kind of demystify this as much as possible, because sometimes these words can threaten the audience. I would say that the simple way I would explain this is, if you're looking at a growth playbook, if you're looking at a typical growth playbook for any consumer company, you have an acquisition playbook, you have an engagement playbook, you have retention playbooks, right? Like for example, acquisition, you can strongly think about your new channels, your SEO, and blah blah blah, sign up flows and things like that. There are a lot of playbooks available for it. But if you look at a two-sided place like Instacart or Uber or Postmates or Lyft, the reality is you can definitely use some of the playbooks coined by, let's say, the Facebooks of the world, the Twitters and the LinkedIns of the world for the demand side, because you can use the typical playbooks. But you cannot just do it in isolation, because there could be a case where, let's say, you launch a city and imagine there are no drivers in that city. Like no amount of playbook will be able to get you all the riders, because there is nobody available to even like get a car for you. So in two-sided marketplaces, or even like multi-sided marketplaces, you need to create a playbook of growth independently, and also try to see how you can connect these so that one is not off with the other. Let's say Instacart, for example, right? So the most important value proposition that Instacart gives to the customers is when they place an order for groceries, the bag of groceries shows up in your doorstep within 1 to 2 hours. That's the value proposition. But imagine that the number of shoppers or drivers on the platform is actually less than the number of customers you have. That means that promise cannot be kept.
Right.
On the other side, let's say there are too many shoppers and drivers that you've hired, then they are sitting idle and fighting for the same orders. So it's about how do you kind of balance these, and this is where how do you structure your organization, how does the team talk to each other, all come into play. But it's all about how do you create a growth playbook separately for a supply side, because at the end of the day, that is also a cost line, right? Like imagine the thing that we discussed with Uber is the ROI of acquiring a driver probably was not there, and that's why it was such a big deal for them to kind of turn this into a profitable machine, because you're spending a lot of money acquiring drivers, but they're not staying on the platform longer. So the money that you spent is not giving you the ROI.
Right.
That's a growth playbook. On the other side, you have to kind of balance these two, and there are like several techniques for doing this. Maybe one such technique I can talk about is I remember talking to a growth leader at Uber to kind of understand some of the playbooks that they deployed in the early days. And one of the simple examples that he gave was, let's say everybody understands search pricing, right? Like, what does search pricing really mean? It means that the demand is actually outstripping the supply, or there are leading indicators of the fact that there are lesser number of drivers than Uber would actually like. So that's why when you see a search price, it says like, hey, the less number of drivers, so you pay a 20% more premium to get there. So similarly, on the other side, if too many drivers are there, you will see everybody like waiting in a parking lot to get a particular drive, and one of them will get it, the other five probably are just staying idle. So on one side, you have an indicator called search pricing. On the other side, you have an indicator called idle time. Now, the question is, you need to figure out what is the bounds of each of these. So one of the things that Uber did in the early days is like they fixed like 20% as the bounds for search pricing. What it means is, if let's say in the last 1 hour or in the given day or in the given week, whatever time frame they are looking at, more than 20% of the rides had search pricing, that means that they have to start looking at their driver pool, which means that, hey, there is an opportunity for us to increase the drivers because we are seeing a little bit more demand. So let's say now they add a bunch of drivers and the 20 became like 5. Now they've added too many drivers, so they'll try to balance it back. So every company has their own set of techniques, but this is where product management for an operational and a marketplace company is different from let's say a consumer company, where you need to kind of have different product levers that you can exercise and deploy and test at different set of market conditions. For example, if let's say they launch a promotion, suddenly more people might start using the product, and this 20% might become 50%. So you have to deploy a bunch of promotions on the driver side as well to bring a lot of drivers into the equation. So that's that's what I mean by equilibrium. So your job as product leaders is working with design, working with data to figure out what is that sweet spot and try and bring everything into that sweet spot.
Yeah, this is also classically mentioned about as chicken and egg problem, isn't it? I mean,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that clearly.
chicken and egg problem. I think that is also a term that is associated with marketplace equilibrium.
I think it's closer to that. I think it's probably simpler than a chicken and egg problem, because chicken and egg problem assumes that there is actually a loop and you don't know where to kind of start. But I think in this cases, you can always start with like one side of the marketplace, which is the supply side, right? Like you can always have more drivers and help them with promotions and things like that, so that they at least know they are making the paycheck, and then you work on the demand side to get there. But always you have to start with demand first, right? Because when there's no demand, there's no product and there's no company.
Got it. So what I understand from you is it's basically continuous experimentation, looking at how the demand and supply is. So there is no a perfect equilibrium at any given point of time. Demand could be more than supply could be more than demand. So you try to reach equilibrium, but I don't think you will ever reach perfect equilibrium. Is that fair to say?
I think that's what I defined by the sweet spot, right? So I think working with the business leaders, the finance leaders in Instacart, we had very strong business analytics people who I partnered with and who my team partnered with, and they helped us understood like, hey, what are all the secondary metrics and financial metrics that will get affected when you are in, let's say, the oversupplied market, and similarly on the undersupplied market, what are all the constraints that will happen? And I think once you understand these, you can define what you call like a sweet spot. And let's say Uber is running in 1500 markets across the world. Every market needs to be tracked on where they are in this, what I call the spectrum of equilibrium. Some might be actually in the sweet spot and you don't have to do anything, and some markets might be very new, so they are probably in the oversupplied category, and that's fine, because there is a natural movement towards equilibrium when markets actually mature. Because when new market starts, you cannot expect that to be in equilibrium. So every company has their own LTV calculations, and they say, hey, we're going to spend this much amount of money in like growth and expansions, and we're going to let that market grow first, because there is no point optimizing a market if it has not grown. So maybe they write off a year or like 18 months, and after that they say, hey, okay, in this spectrum, where are they falling? If they are in the equilibrium, great. If not, let's do something. Let's say they have not yet caught the demand, they will try some demand side techniques. Let's say they have a lot of demand and they don't have enough on the supply side. The companies can launch a bunch of promotions, or partner with some of the companies to hire more shoppers and things like that. But it all starts with understanding what is your product and company's marketplace equilibrium, and what is that spectrum. And I think it could be different for different companies. Like for some companies it has to be much more tighter because of their unit economics and because of their revenue calculations, and for some company it's okay to have it broad because they are in a business that actually generates a little bit more of margins than other companies.
Got it. But other than live reacting to demand and supply, I'm sure there is also some amount of prediction models. Like, for example, a holiday season would be approached. You imagine that, okay, there will be a surge of demand and stuff like that. Did it also apply to Instacart?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I would extend the same metric point to kind of measuring that over a period of time, right? So let's say there is a metric called let's use the search pricing example, right? So let's say you're looking at a market and plotting the percentage of rights that had at least like $1 in search pricing, something like that. We can just pick it as a good example. And as you said, you can actually see how that metric actually changed across all markets and for a market over a period of time. And when you kind of understand these both, you know that okay, there were periods, maybe you will find weekend versus weekday trends, you will find morning afternoon versus evening trend, you will find holiday versus the day before and the day after holiday trends. These are the trends that product and technical folks need to kind of understand how to develop products for example, you can have a promotion always turned on a day immediately after a long weekend, because suddenly your entire demand curve gets shifted. I remember at Instacart where uh, all of us in the product and engineering leadership like hated long weekends because we know that the day after the long weekend it's going to have a horrible impact on the metrics, because not everybody who used to work on Monday morning will show up on Tuesday as well. So that could be another way to kind of think about how do you sharpen your tools to kind of combat that change in demand curve that is different from a typical week or a typical day.
Yeah, seems like a tough challenge, isn't it? I mean,
It's interesting. So
you cannot get rid of your say suppliers just because the demand would be less. So you have to actually account for their cost and average it out around the year or something of that sort. I'm sure.
it is definitely a good problem to have, but I think that is why it's important to have a framework. And again, as I would say, my team, you don't have to be perfect to start with, but I think you should start somewhere. I think you should need to understand where are you in that equilibrium spectrum, and it's okay. You don't have to be perfect on every market on every day of the year to be in that. But not having that would actually be like shooting in the dark.
Nice. Cool. My next section is my favorite. I usually, whenever I talk to product leaders, I ask them to share their war stories. I'm sure in your experience, you would have experienced scenarios where you came across a product challenge, which was the toughest product challenge of your career.
Mm.
And you eventually succeeded, or might have failed. You could not get what you wanted to achieve, but you learned some valuable lessons.
Mhm.
Do you have a story or two to share with us?
Great question. I think one thing that I felt was very interesting about my role, and also like across all the teams at Instacart was especially in the world of the fulfillment, is like we are never done. And the reason I say that is you can always make the quality better. You can always improve the cost. You can always improve the efficiency and the capacity in the system. So that was one of the things that I actually liked about my role, which is the non-deterministic nature of how things operate. Always like we're throwing constant challenge at us, and again, may not be for some people, but that was my motivating factor going to office every day. So I think one story that I want to share is in the early days, we were trying to kind of make the business profitable, because as I said, Instacart is a great product from the very beginning. Like the moment the consumer knew that, hey, I can sit in my couch, spend time with my family and my kids and friends, and place an order for groceries, and somebody is going to do my job for me. Great. It had a product market fit right then and there. But what the company did not have in the early days is like, how do you kind of figure out the unit economics? And the team that I worked with was like fantastic. Like everybody in product to engineering to operations, and also the finance team, like we all like came together during this wartime of how do you kind of turn this excellent product into also an excellent business. That I would say was a core part of my experience at Instacart in the early days, like 2016, 2017, 2018. And it involved a bunch of things. Definitely a good combination of, as I call, the metrics movers and strategic bets. And these kind of came together to make the company successful. I think one specific learning that for me, especially as a product leader, is sometimes you need to kind of understand: are you operating within the constraints, or are you operating outside the constraints? So the reason this understanding is important is sometimes, however great you are in executing, you might be executing within a constrained space well. So the first thing that you need to do is like understand how to kind of get out of the constraints, because all the efforts and resources that you put into great execution might not translate into great results if you're still operating within those constraints. So I'll give you one example. So let's say that let's take Amazon for example. So Amazon does like billions and billions of like package deliveries every day. One of the things that I've learned through like reading a couple of papers that got published and things like that is they always think about what is the right balance between taking the time to deliver to the customers, and how much time if you take will make the delivery late. The reason the first one is important is like let's say there are 10 packages to be delivered within let's say Bay Area, within a particular street, and four of them are due by 4 p.m. and three of them are due by 4:30, and another three of them are due by like 5:30. The best way for you to kind of do is like wait for all these demand to actually come in and then start the delivery. Otherwise, instead of sending one driver, you're going to send like three drivers to do the same thing. So we had like a typical scenario like that at Instacart as well, where for a period of time we were what I call optimizing within like a small circle without trying to understand how can we make like small shifts in consumer products that opens up the constraints, and then do a better job of making the product much more efficient. So that is one example that I learned is sometimes when you are like heads down on solving a problem for the company, you're actually operating within the constraints. So you need to also understand, can I change this small rule of the game either through a different consumer offering, or maybe give a small incentive or gamify an experience on the consumer side that actually changes the rules a little bit on the supply side or the operational side. So that is one thing that I learned as part of this, and I think it's a valuable lesson that is going to stick with me for the rest of my career.
Cool. Thank you. My last question here is, so you had your career transition where you started as a first product manager and then you moved to senior roles. The challenge is always that shift when you are an individual contributor as a product manager, and then you move into a senior role where you may be leading a bunch of product managers, but you cannot shed the individual contributor product manager in you. So that shift, and also there are other responsibilities that you need to be aware of, and also it's also about the style and the leadership So there's a lot, and many people cannot navigate that transition. So could you give us some advice on product managers who want to transition towards senior leadership roles, or how can they prepare themselves? What are the missteps that they can avoid and stuff like that?
Great question. I think this is probably one of the most important questions for folks who are looking into future product leadership roles. And I can give like 2 days worth of failures that I've had along this transition, because I think that is the case. I think one
I,
piece of
you have your share of you learned it the hard way. Is that what
I
you're
would
trying?
say definitely the hard way. If you ask like first three of my reports, they'll say, "Oh my God, I reported to Bala, who was a horrible manager." But I think there is an interesting learning here, and I'm glad I learned it in the earlier part of my career the hard way than later part of my career, where I think where I think it might become much more expensive for someone like me who's trying to kind of grow and create an impact at like larger companies. I think the first piece of advice that I would give is when you are when you're making this transition as part of a hyper growth company, you honestly get away with a lot because there is enough surface area for everybody to kind of contribute, and that was the case for me. Like the reason I became a manager and hired folks is because I was managing like 4 or 5 products across like 25 engineers, and I honestly couldn't scale. I was working like 16 hours a day. That was not the way. So one of the reasons I scaled is because it was the only way for me to kind of like figure out. But I wish I didn't do that reactively and thought proactively. So the first advice I would give is uh, try to see if you can scale by leverage and not scale by time. So always people do the opposite, right? Which is like I can always do more work and cover a lot of areas and create scope for me. But I would advise them to I would advise everybody to start thinking about, if you're part of a product or a company that's scaling, first of all, that's good. You're in the right place at the right time, so congrats. But honestly, also have to assess, am I giving quality output to all of the things that I'm actually part of? If not, assess on how do you kind of give that. So that's step number one. And sometimes you have like great managers and great leaders who can say, hey, Ravi, Bala, you're unable to kind of like have coverage across each of these. Let's figure out a way to scale you. If you're ready for a management role, let's try that. If you're not ready for a management role, great, let's just add more resources under the product team and help them, mentor them, and things like that. So that's step number one.
But could you help us understand the difference between scale by leverage? What does leverage here? Where does that come from?
Absolutely. So I think the differentiation is, so let's say you're a product manager, part of a hyper growth company, and the company is scaling, like the business is booming, all the metrics are like pointing in the right direction, but it creates like more scope and more problems. So that means that honestly the team has to do more to put more points on the board. So as a product manager, let's say you have a lot of context across all of them, but you are unable to, let's say you become the bottleneck first. I think that's step number one. First, it's important to understand if the product manager becomes the bottleneck, and if that's the case, either like you need to kind of understand either through self-realization, or again, if you have good leaders and managers, they can detect that. Now I can detect if one or two of my reports are stretched or not. That's pretty easy signal for me to get. But when I was stretched like 4 5 years back, I didn't realize that. So that's number one. Once that realization happens, it's important to understand what are the areas that you want to kind of focus on. And in product term, it's called the player coach mentality, which is like you can still try to kind of own one or two areas, but you hopefully delegate 2 or 3 areas to somebody else, because you don't have a resource constraint with respect to engineering or operations. It's just that as a product person, you have a resource constraint. So this is where great product operations managers actually step in and say, hey, Bala, Ravi, I can actually help you with that. I know you're running, you're becoming the blocker for many decisions. So can I help you? So that becomes a place for you to say, okay, there is this particular problem, this item in the roadmap. Do you mind like working with design, working with engineering, come up with a spec? So you can start to delegate a few of those and like grow junior members or associate members of the team. Again, it may not be through management, it may be through mentoring as well. It depends on one or the other. But I think that's step number two. And then what you can do is you can help them make those decisions, but the groundwork for making all those work, again, as I said, there are multiple things that you have to do as a product manager, like working with customers, working with the other teams in understanding dependencies, working with design in coming up with like prototypes, working with engineering in coming up with like architecture. You can do all those things and then ask them to kind of come back and say, hey, use me as a resource to kind of make those decisions, but all the groundwork you can do it and come. That's, I would say, scale by leverage. And if you can do it like for the first product, the second product, and the third product, you have actually figured out a way to get things done. And the interesting thing about that transition is like that transition is actually not easy, because especially for someone who has been like much more closer to the product, has an amazing ownership and accountability, you need to kind of unlearn your skills and then work with somebody else so that you can delegate a few things. So that's what I mean by scale leverage versus scale versus time.
Got it. Any other tips for what about soft skills for individual product manager to product leader in an organization?
I think the first thing is having a way to influence and coach is extremely important. And I think the good thing about product management, even as an IC role, is some of the tenets of being a successful manager is part of the job, because you should influence people. There's no way to get things done, because honestly, product manager in isolation is basically a bunch of specs, right? It's like nothing is actually being done. So there are some skill sets that you need to kind of sharpen as part of your IC role to be a successful leader or a manager. But you also need to be aware that there are certain skill sets as a product manager that you need to kind of unlearn, which is understanding that having extreme ownership and accountability across all the areas might actually be something that you have to unlearn. So what I mean by that is you need to still give room to the product managers who are actually reporting to you to make that happen. And that was the tough part for me, especially coming from an engineering background and a technical background. I was always closer to the details. I knew all the numbers in and out, and that was one of the things that I had to kind of maintain, because I wanted to kind of give the right critiques and feedback and coaching. But you need to kind of balance that with giving autonomy as well. So I think it is definitely a most of the things is like art, and less of that is actually science. And it is okay if you don't get it right the first time. Like I don't think I got it right the first few times. And I think you have to constantly be self-critical and also have great mentors. I think that's one of the things that I've been very fortunate right in my career, from Microsoft to LinkedIn to Instacart, is I've had great mentors who sometimes are natural leaders and sometimes are people who have actually created a playbook for themselves.
And the mentors could be within the organization, outside the organization as well, I suppose.
I think outside the organization might always be helpful, because within the organization, again, this is probably my experience, is it goes a little bit tactical. It goes into like, hey, that situation, this situation. I think the best thing is if you can find mentors outside the organization who to whom you can actually give the context, but they can give you a little bit of an unbiased opinion and an unbiased guidance. And also they are someone, if you get the right people, have seen more patterns of these, so they can actually share a playbook that actually works for you.
The other aspect of product leadership is how to get not just influence others, but um, the rest of the leadership would. How do you earn respect of the rest of the leadership, right? Say, for example, you are promoted, or maybe you joined in a new company as a product leader. So you are under immense pressure, because for the first few months, it's not honeymoon for you, right? So you have to identify your quick wins and then quickly build rapport with the rest of the leadership, and so that they can trust your decisions and stuff like that. So it's a very, very tough road. What are some of your ways to become quickly earn the respect of the rest of the leadership and set yourself for success?
A great question. I think there are a couple of flavors of this, and I'll try to keep it short. I don't know how much time we have. I think the fact that you are probably promoted to a management role is firstly a sign of credibility. So if somebody is externally hired, that's great, right? They are brought in for a specific set of skill sets. But internally, if you are actually being promoted, that means that there is already a vote of confidence on you. So you actually should feel um, first good, the fact that there is recognition and trust that has been bestowed upon you. So that's number one. The second thing that you have to realize is uh, you need to unlearn, as I said, a certain set of things, and you need to kind of figure out quickly what is the playbook that you want to kind of deploy. What are the things that you should stop doing? What are the things that you should start doing more of? And what are the things you should continue doing? And I think this is a place where you should honestly expect great feedback from your team, because they should feel comfortable coming to you and telling, like, I was actually blessed that my reports were like very very candid with me whenever I was wrong, and I probably learned more from them than actually from the management and leadership. So I think that's number two. And
You
number two,
ask feedback from your reports. Is that what you're saying?
yes. So I think definitely have a very strong connection with your team, and also it's important to kind of make sure that they see you as a leader, and your job is to kind of help them and coach them and mentor them, and also be clear on what the bar is, because ultimately your job is not a people pleaser. You're not there to just coach and influence. You're a leader because you're expected to create business impact at scale, but you need to balance both. I think that's the reality, and that's the hard part. And it's okay if you don't learn it on the first go, but it's extremely important to understand that every week your job is to uh, elevate the people, keep the bar high. And you can do that in multiple ways. You can do that by focusing a lot more on hiring. I think this is where I learned a lot about hiring. Like, how do you kind of raise the bar by bringing in somebody who is better than like the people in the team? Amazon calls this bar raising, which is somebody new to the team has to be in the 51st percentile, because by definition it pushes the team. So there are a bunch of techniques that you can actually do, but the most important thing is you have to realize that it is a new job and it is not an extension of your old job. um, but it's different if you're an external hire. Honestly, I would say it's actually easier for you to actually get 6 or 7 reports and manage than try to get like 1 or 2, because I read a great blog from one of the partners at Redpoint, which is, if you have like 1 or 2 reports, then you think that you have more time to do actually IC work, but the reality is that is not something that you should fall in trap to. But you have like 6 or 7 reports, like there is enough for you to kind of help the 6 or 7 people. So even if you try to kind of go and do that IC work, you cannot. So if somebody is like thinking about senior leadership roles, try to create a playbook for that with like less number of reports, but be cognizant of the fact that you don't go into that IC mode, because it is not easy to kind of do this back and forth. You cannot be like an IC for Monday and Tuesday and be a manager for like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That just doesn't how it works.
Got it. I will. I mean, I'm just stressing on this because functional capabilities are important, but the softer aspects are very, very important. I've seen so many people struggle with leadership roles, and they have to be. They go back, or they have to leave organizations. So I've seen that many times. So that's why I asked these questions a lot many times. You said it's important that others see you as a leader. How does that happen? It's so easy to say, but how does it actually translate? What is it that you have to demonstrate that others see you as a leader? Is it by being firm with your decision making? Is it by uh, say uh, putting forth your foot on certain decisions? What are those traits where others can see you as a leader?
I think it involves a multitude of things, but the two things that I try to do in my role and to decent level of success is, one, uh, whenever there is uncertainty and whenever the team is running into a blocker, unblock them as quickly as possible, because that's the way I feel leaders can gain credibility, which is like, hey, this is the piece where I need help, and I need to reach out to my manager or the product leader within the organization to help unblock. And the moment you open that gate for them, you kind of get that, like, let's say one cookie, right? Like, you get that credibility, and if you continuously do that over time, then you're actually first seen as somebody who actually helps the team get more points on the board. That's number one. And number two is, are you helping stretch themselves? Because the goal of a leader is to make sure that you're putting people outside their comfort zone, not by force but by choice. I think you need to kind of do that by asking the right questions in product reviews or design reviews, and this is where your foundational knowledge about product and metrics and business come into play. Because I don't think in a product leadership role you can just survive by just being great at soft skills. I think you definitely need soft skills. There is no debate there. You need to be a very good communicator. You need to be someone who drives consensus, but you also need to strongly understand the product. Like, you need to understand the market, you need to understand the metrics in and out. And when there is a story being told about this particular metric, you should be able to question that and push the team even further. I think those two are the things that I've learned. I'm sure there are a bunch of other things that I don't know as well.
Right. So this is getting respect from your team. How about horizontal leadership, or rapport with other business leaders, or other functional leaders, because you also need to uh, build respect and rapport with them. So how do you get them? Because suppose you own the roadmap, and say people from head of sales and head of marketing would come and challenge you. How do you still hold firm and protect your turf?
I think it's less about like holding firm on your ground or being territorial. I think it's more about wearing the hat of uh, customer first and company first, and less about being team first. Because there have been so many instances where I've actually it's not like taking a side, but rather I think there was a very valid concern that was raised by, let's say, a finance team or an operations team, and we had to kind of change the course with respect to the product. So to me, it's about not having any ego about like, hey, this is my team and my territory, so I need to kind of protect them. At the same time, you need to also make sure that whenever there is a clear feedback from the other stakeholders, you need to translate that into something that's actionable for the team. But you need to do that. You need to do that in a way that you still know that your team feels that you have their back. But at the same time, it's not having the back at all cost. It's about how do you make sure that you put the company and the consumers first ahead of your team. So that's number one. And number two, it's about creating impact. I think the moment you actually create impact, you start to get credibility. I think this is even easier in a startup world because it's easier to know the metrics. It's a little bit harder in a large corporation, but my experience is like the moment you put points on the board, you get credibility and your team gets credibility, and that's how you build it. It's like a bank account, right? Like you don't want to run on debt, you want to run on credit.
Got it. That's the most important point you mentioned. Getting credibility and trust, because when you join an organization, it's the trust is 50-50. Okay, and it's like a battery pack, right? So you have to work on increasing that trust by getting quick wins and increasing your credibility, and then automatically respect follows.
Yeah.
So
So
great.
you start from zero. You always start from zero, right? You always start from an empty bank account.
Ah, from here. That's
You
not a
always
great.
have a multi-bank account, and your job is to put money in the bank, and then you have to withdraw, right? Because if you just keep putting money in the bank, that means you're actually being too soft, I would say. I think I made that mistake sometimes of like not being firm and not being decisive. But you have money in the bank, you can use that to make decisions and use it rightfully. But let's say you're drawing $10 from the bank, your hope is with that you're gonna find the next $100. But if you're always drawing from the bank and you're not adding in, then there is an issue as well. So I think that's the way. This is one of the advice that I got from my Microsoft mentors, which is, and that's why I use this bank account analogy. It's like you need to add more money to the bank, but your hope is you're also uh, buying more equity with all the withdrawals you're making, right? So that it becomes even more of a credit later in the time. So that's one of the things that stuck with me for a long period of time.
So that means you might be more giving as and conceding, but also in negotiations you have to be firm in taking back your share. Is that the analogy here?
Yeah, it's completely okay to use your credit, right? But the places where you have to, let's say, override, or the places where you have to be firm, hopefully is a bet that actually succeeds. So that's why some companies expect at least like a 70% good decision making from the leaders. Because the hope is when you're making those decisions, you're trying to create an impact at like much higher level. Maybe you withdraw a little bit of. This is where like performance management comes in. This is where giving critical feedback to the team comes in. But you're doing that for the right reasons, that creates a bigger impact for the company and the team. So that's the hope.
Got it. Excellent. I could go on and on, but I am very mindful of your time as well, Bala. But this was quite enriching. Of course, I loved the aspects of equilibrium, marketplace, and stuff like that. But I started to enjoy the softer aspects of leadership. So completely, thoroughly enjoyed. Thank you for your time, Bala, and sharing your wealth of wisdom with us and my audience.
Thank you, Ravi, for the opportunity. I always love discussing about the past failures and past lessons. Actually, make me remind myself of the things that I need to be aware of as I grow in my career. So thanks a lot for it, and appreciate the audience time on a Friday afternoon as well.
Excellent, Bala. See you then. Bye bye.
Bye bye. See you, folks.